Hello once again, ARA delegates. This presentation is an overview of what you can expect at ARA and a review of the rules of order. So this presentation will go into some detail about the rules of order, including how you identify yourself at the microphone at ARA, how you make amendments to resolutions, what it means to call the question, and a little bit about strategy and points of order. We'll also review some of the information you need in order to navigate the facility in Edmonton, as ARA will be in Edmonton this year in 2023. So, the rules of order. Now, ARA is run according to parliamentary procedures, and you can find all of these in the ATA Members Handbook on the association website. However, we will go through the procedures in how to use these rules of order in some of the key situations that you'll encounter during ARA on a regular basis. So when you want to speak, in fact, anytime you want to speak, you must identify yourself first. So approach the nearest microphone. That's step number one. The chair will recognize you via the mic number. Now, if there's a lineup, don't move microphones in order to try and jump the queue. Every time you go to a different microphone, you go to the back of the line, even though there might be fewer people at that microphone that you're moving to. So stay where you are, pick one microphone and just stay there, and then eventually you will be recognized in the order that you rose or the order that you have approached the microphone. When you are recognized, you begin by stating your last name and then follow that with your local. So, for example, Nellis, Calgary Public. When you're making an amendment, once again, you always have to start by indicating your name and local. So, Nellis, Calgary Public. But now, you also need somebody else to second you. That could be Clemens, Calgary Public, or some of your other ARA delegates that you might be seated beside. Then you would simply say, I move to amend the motion, and then you indicate what the amendment is that you would like to make. Now, it's very important to do that in this order. If you try and debate first, the chair will call you out of order and your amendment will not be allowed. So you have to state what the amendment is and then provide a rationale. All you need to do is convince 50% plus one of other delegates that this is a good idea and your amendment can be carried. So, there's also a procedure to amend the amendment. This starts to get a little bit complex when we see it on the floor of ARA, and I'll give you an example in the next slide. But an amendment to the amendment is when you propose a change to an amendment that is already being considered. So, once that is on the floor, no other amendments can be dealt with. You have to deal with the amendment to the amendment, and then you go back to the amendment, and then you can continue on depending on how the floor wants to go. So indicate your name and local as usual, indicate your seconder's name and local, and then move to make an amendment to the amendment. And once again, propose what that is, and then explain why. So let's see how this works. Perhaps you have a resolution on the table that says, be it resolved that the Alberta Teachers Association hold ARA 2024 outside of Alberta. You might decide to make an amendment to that. Be it resolved that the Alberta Teachers Association hold ARA 2024 in Las Vegas rather than outside of Alberta. That's still in the spirit of the original resolution. You're just asking it to be more specific, so that's a valid amendment. But then somebody might rise to make a further amendment to the amendment by adding at Caesars Palace in Las Vegas. So in this scenario, you'll have to deal with the part in blue first. So when you're voting, the first vote on this would be just the part in blue. Do we want to add the words at Caesars Palace? And if that passed, then the next vote would be on the part in red and blue. Well, I guess they would change the part in blue to be red as well on the screen at ARA. But then you'd just be voting on, do you want to strike out outside of Alberta and insert in Las Vegas at Caesars Palace? And if that passed, then you would have to vote a third time on the original resolution, which was twice amended, to read that the Alberta Teachers Association hold ARA 2024 in Las Vegas at Caesars Palace. Now, you could defeat the part in blue and just have the original resolution or the original amendment as proposed in Las Vegas, and then let the association choose the hotel in Las Vegas. You could also, at this stage, propose a further amendment to the resolution. And, for example, you could propose an amendment to the amendment that modifies the dates or something like that. But at any rate, the process is as it is. So you would need to deal with amendments to the amendment, return to the amendment, deal with those, and then you're dealing with the original resolution. Calling the question is a procedural motion that is made when the speaker wishes to end debate and just move straight to the vote. Now, when this happens, you need to be very ready with your voting cards. You can't debate whether or not to call the question, and the speaker doesn't have to provide a rationale, but it does require a 2/3 majority of the House in order to actually end debate and move straight to a vote. So if this happens, well, that's actually, before we say if this happens, there are two types of calling the question. There is calling the question, which is a motion to end debate on the specific item being considered, for example, an amendment to the amendment. And then there is calling all previous questions, which would end debate on all of the amendments and the main motion, and then you would just vote. Okay? So procedurally, somebody would move to the microphone, indicate their name, their local, and the seconder's name and local, and they would say either, I move to call the question, or I move to call all previous questions. The chair will immediately call for a vote, and if it is carried by a 2/3 majority, you will then be immediately voting on the other motion or motions that are on the floor at the time. Okay? Now, you have to be a little bit careful, because if you call all previous questions during debate on the budget, that is somewhat significant. Budget changes are done in the form of an amendment to the budget motion. So if you call the question during the budget debate, you're asking to call the question on whether somebody wants to modify a particular budget line and just vote on that part. But if during the budget you call all previous questions, that means vote on this piece, modification to a particular budget line, and then end all debate on the budget entirely and vote on the budget. People get a little upset about that. It's generally not the case that you would find support for calling all previous questions on the budget, but if you call the question on a particular budget motion, that might have some more success associated with it. Now, strategically, you have to consider when you are proposing the amendments to a particular resolution. Sometimes it's wise to wait until one amendment is out of the way before you make another one. And sometimes you might want to make an amendment to the amendment if you think somebody's going to call a question. So timing when you rise to make a specific change to a resolution is important. If somebody calls all questions on a particular resolution and that carries, you've lost your chance to make an amendment. So it's hard, impossible in fact, to tell whether somebody's going to call all questions and whether the House would support that. But it just speaks to being prepared when the resolution comes on the floor for debate. If you go to the microphone immediately when that resolution is up for debate, then you're in line for making sure that your thought is going to be put to the delegates. But if you're late to the game, that could mean that you're needing to wait for a future ARA to make this proposal. Now, if you're thinking about strategy about calling the question, um, if no one else needs to speak or wants to speak or is lined up at the microphones, you don't need to call the question. If you're the last speaker, it doesn't really make much sense. Or if you're the second to last speaker, it doesn't really make much sense. You're not saving any time. If somebody attempted to call the question just a few speakers ago and it failed, and you're trying to call the question again, you're also not going to ingratiate yourself to the House. So consider whether it's necessary to end debate now, or whether further debate will be helpful, or whether you believe it would be the will of the House to cease debate on a particular item. And that would be when you might wish to consider calling the question. Another word on debate. So you need to understand that you can only debate once on any given motion, and the chair will enforce this vigorously. If you intend to make an amendment, do that first and then debate. But make sure that you say everything you need to say in the one time that you are at the microphone, because if you want to rise again and speak to something, that may not be possible. Now, the exception to that is you can speak to an amendment to the amendment, and then you can rise and speak or debate on the amendment, and then you can rise again and speak on the main motion. But if you speak to the main motion and then you want to speak again to the main motion, you're not going to be permitted to speak that second time. Points of order are something you will also hear somewhat frequently at ARA. So when you believe that the rules of Parliament have been violated, or that there's been a mistake in procedure, this is a priority issue. So you would jump up from your seat, wave your voting card around urgently, and move to the nearest microphone. The objective here is get the attention of the chair right away. You jump to the front of the line, the chair will recognize you immediately, and then you can say your name and local, say point of order, and explain what particular violation you believe has occurred, and see what the chair has to say about it. Now, a request for information is another procedural motion that is often heard at ARA. You use this when you need to ask an urgent question related to the business at hand. A request for information motion is not used when you want to debate or provide information yourself. This is for you to ask a very important question. So just like you would do with a point of order, wave your voting card around urgently and move to the nearest microphone and say your name and local and request for information, and then you can ask your question. An example of when you might use this, request for information might be when you ask the chair what's the margin that this resolution needs to pass by. So if, for example, somebody called the question and you forgot how many people need to vote in favor in order to call the question, you could wave your card around, move to the nearest microphone and say, Nellis, Calgary Public, request for information. How many people need to vote in favor of calling the question in order for that to pass? And then the chair can answer that question. Points of privilege are usually used by members who, by virtue of their position, are authorized to speak on behalf of the delegation that they represent. You'll see these throughout ARA, and folks use these to make presentations or provide some special recognitions. So they are some of the niceties of ARA. A division of the House is another procedural motion. If a delegate believes that the chair has ruled in error, which means, if the chair says, I call that carried, or I call that defeated, and you don't think that's quite right, you can jump up and call for a division of the House. This doesn't need a seconder, and you would use this when the vote was really quite close or indecisive, or you just simply believe that the chair didn't see the hands the right way. So call division of the House, and anybody can do this, and there's no vote or debate on whether to call division of the House. It just is called, and then you'll see association staff jump up and go disperse themselves throughout the room, and they will start counting votes in favor and votes opposed. So when this happens, again, get your voting card ready because you're going to vote again on the motion that was just previously debated. So keep your voting card up when it's called for, and then when association staff have indicated to you that they've counted you, you can then put it down. Proposing an emergent resolution. This happens, again, with some frequency at ARA, but if you see the need for proposing a resolution that has to be done this year, in other words, next year is going to be too late, and you think we need this right now, first thing to do might be to talk to your local president for advice. When you are ready to propose an emergent resolution, you would go to the microphone, and the motion is to suspend the rules of order for the purpose of putting an emergent resolution on the order paper. And so the first thing that's going to happen with that, and of course this needs your name and your local and your seconder's name and local. First thing that's going to happen is the chair is going to ask you to provide the wording of the motion that you want to put on the floor. And then they'll ask you to speak just to the emergent nature of the resolution. So not your rationale for the motion itself. That's for later. You have to give the House a rationale for why do we need to consider this right now. And sometimes that's going to be obvious based on the wording of the motion, and you don't have to say too much. But in other occasions where it's not immediately clear based on the resolution that you're putting forward why it needs to be debated at ARA 2023, you'll have to provide a bit of information. Strategically, you don't want to go too long on this. A very concisely worded and clear description about the emergent nature of a resolution will earn you more support than going on for your full 5 minutes. So that's why you might want to talk to the president for advice, is to get some guidance on how to wordsmith this rationale. Close to the start of ARA, around noon on Saturday, there will be an opportunity to pull resolutions from the block. So during the pre-ARA meetings, you'll remember voting on pretty much all of the resolutions that you would look at ARA. And most of the resolutions that you voted on in the pre-meetings will be grouped into two blocks. The first block is expiring current directives, where you've, as locals around the province, you've indicated at least 2/3 support for council's position. And then the other block of motions would be the resolutions put forward by locals or provincial executive council or both, where you've got at least 2/3 support for council's position, or the steering committee believes that a block vote would expedite the work of the assembly. You can pull resolutions from the block. So what you would do is, and when I say pull resolutions from the block, I mean that would put them on the order paper for debate on that individual motion. But if it's in the block, as you may have seen before with how the local does things, that means you're voting on all of those things together. You're not debating any of them. You're just saying, do with these resolutions the thing that PEC said we should do with them. And then that's it. So if you're trying to pull it out for debate, you would identify your name and local, your seconder's name and local, and then say, I move to pull resolution, and use the resolution number from the block. And then you would have to provide, again, a concisely worded rationale for doing so. You need 2/3 majority support in order to pull a resolution from the block. So make it a compelling rationale. Simply indicating, I think we should talk about this, that's not going to be enough. Locals have already talked about it in the pre-meetings at their own local level. So if there is additional information that has come to light since the pre-meetings, that's often a very good reason to pull it from the block. But don't shy away from asking your more experienced delegates for help on this, and to try and word your rationale appropriately. Now we're going to move on to things you might expect at ARA in Edmonton. And now we're at a new facility this year, so nobody quite knows exactly what to expect here. But at the JW Marriott, this is how things are probably going to go down. Now the official order paper won't be released until sometime in May. But what you can expect is on Saturday morning, we'll begin about 9 a.m. You'll have to get there a little bit earlier. Bring your delegate credential form to the registration table so that you can pick up your voting card. This is critical. If you forget to bring your delegate credential, you're not getting a voting card and you're not voting at ARA. That's problematic because you're a delegate. So we'll do that, and then there will be some opening remarks, introductions, some reports, and eventually we'll get to the consideration of the resolution blocks. There is a coffee break at about 10:15, and then there's a break for lunch at about 11:45. The business of the House reconvenes at about 1:30, and you would continue with resolutions and reports, another coffee break, and then you adjourn for the day at 5:30. On Sunday morning, again, you're convening at 9 a.m. This is the long day. So you'll see presentations and resolutions, another coffee break and lunch break. There's probably a Calgary public luncheon. You might have details about that by the time you view this presentation, but we don't currently. Sunday afternoon is when we would look at the budget traditionally. So the budget and budget resolutions, coffee at 3:15 and break for dinner at 5:30. After dinner, you reconvene at 7:30 and continue with either debate on the budget, or if the budget's already done, you might continue with resolutions at that point. You then adjourn for the day at 9:30 p.m. And this is a hard stop time. There's labor laws that prevent association and hotel facility staff from working any longer. So unfortunately, there won't be any motions to extend. If you're not done, you continue into Monday morning starting at 9, and then you go right through with perhaps a coffee break in there somewhere and adjourn at 1 o'clock. So some peculiarities of ARA. You need a voting card, and without that voting card, you have no voice. There is a unique number on your voting card that you will need. That is your ticket to fabulous door prizes, so please make sure you hold on to that. And another thing, the media may be present for some of these proceedings, so please be cautious. You are operating under the Code of Professional Conduct at all times, and remember that your comments could be recorded and used in news reports if the media happen to catch some of this. So comport yourself accordingly. Some facility notes. So parking, there's limited parking around. I mean, you can certainly carpool up from Calgary. There is an option for Local 38 coach busing that you'll have heard about. If you do decide to bring your own vehicle, it is quite pricey to park with valet parking at the Marriott. It's $55 per day. You might decide to park across the street in the Bell Tower Parkade. That is $10 per day, but keep in mind there's entry only after 6 p.m. So that would mean that you're arriving somewhat later on the Friday. In terms of the location of the ARA proceedings at the Marriott, you'll be in the Wayne Gretzky Ballroom. That's on the 3rd floor. And there will be washrooms and snacks and stuff like that immediately outside, drinks, for example, coffee and pop, immediately outside of the ballroom. Hospitality suites, again, at the time of this recording, this information is not available. However, it is likely that you'll see hospitality suites on both Saturday night and Sunday night. All delegates are invited to participate in those, so just stay tuned for announcements related to time and location. And that's it, folks. We wish you a happy and productive ARA in 2023. And if you have further questions, don't hesitate to get in touch with your local executive staff officers or with your local president.